Silk from China once graced Roman nobility, and Indian spices transformed medieval European banquets. These ancient trade routes wove the world's first empires into a single story of exchange and influence. By the end of this journey, you will understand how these lost pathways built the very foundations of our modern global society. We will uncover why entire networks of commerce and culture vanished from history, only to be rediscovered through fragments of pottery and forgotten maps. How did a simple stone from Afghanistan end up in an Egyptian pharaoh's tomb? What caused the bustling caravanserais to fall silent after centuries of noise? The answers redefine our past. What forgotten connection between distant lands most surprises you? That simple stone from an Afghan mine, resting in an Egyptian tomb, tells a profound story of connection. Long before the Silk Road became a legend, a web of ancient pathways pulsed with life. One of the earliest and most vital was the route for Lapis Lazuli, a brilliant blue stone mined only in the mountains of modern Afghanistan. This prized material traveled thousands of miles to reach the royal courts of Mesopotamia, where it was fashioned into jewelry, seals, and the inlaid eyes of statues. But this was far more than a simple transaction for pretty rocks. These exchanges were acts of diplomacy, gifts between rulers that cemented alliances and acknowledged mutual power. Archaeologists studying burial sites from this era find these foreign treasures placed with great care, revealing a complex network of relationships that existed as early as 3,000 years before the Common Era. The real cargo moving along these routes, however, was not just luxury goods, it was knowledge. With the traders came revolutionary technologies like advanced methods for working metal, allowing societies to forge stronger tools and weapons. Perhaps even more transformative was the quiet movement of agricultural products. Imagine the humble seed, strains of wheat and barley, first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, began their slow journey across these early networks. Their arrival in new lands fundamentally altered what people could grow and eat, supporting larger populations and more stable communities. This was a silent revolution, powered by the footsteps of merchants and the exchange of gifts. How did these early networks set the stage for empires? They created a template. They proved that distant lands could be linked, that resources could flow across vast distances, and that influence could be extended far beyond the point of a sword. This foundational system of connection paved the way for the more structured and ambitious trade corridors that would soon bind continents together. These emerging networks of exchange created a powerful new possibility, the ability to project influence over a vast landscape. This was the ambition of the world's first true empires, but what exactly defined these early giants, entities like the Akkadian, Assyrian, and Achaemenid Persian empires? They were more than just large armies conquering neighbors. They were complex administrative machines driven by a fundamental economic need. To sustain their growing populations and display their unmatched power, they required a constant flow of resources. Luxuries like gold, ivory, and fine woods were essential symbols of status, while basic necessities like timber and metals, especially tin for bronze, were the lifeblood of their economies. Historians often note that the very act of building an empire was intrinsically linked to controlling the routes along which these goods traveled. Wealth and stability flowed directly from this control. To manage this monumental task, these empires became pioneers of economic organization. They established sophisticated administrative systems, standardizing weights and measures across their territories so that a merchant in one city could trust the value of a transaction in another, hundreds of miles away. They invested heavily in infrastructure, building and securing roads, bridges, and way stations. The most famous example is the Persian Royal Road, an engineering marvel that stretched over 1,600 miles. This was not merely a path, it was a highly organized highway with relay stations and fresh horses, allowing messengers, troops, and trade caravans to move with unprecedented speed across diverse regions from the heart of Persia to the Aegean Sea. So what drove these empires to invest so much labor and treasure into this infrastructure? The answer lies in longevity. A secure trade route was an artery, pumping wealth directly to the imperial heart. It funded armies, enriched cities, and connected disparate cultures under a single economic system, binding the empire together not just by force, but by mutual, if enforced, interest. This intricate web of commerce and control was the true backbone of imperial power, setting a pattern that would echo for millennia. The Royal Road was a marvel of administration, but the networks that followed would weave the world even tighter. We often think of the Silk Road as a single, dusty trail, but the truth is far more fascinating. It was never one road, but a sprawling web of overland and maritime paths connecting the workshops of China to the markets of the Mediterranean. And while Chinese silk was certainly a legendary commodity, prized for its beauty and lightness, the caravans carried a much richer cargo. They transported pungent spices that could mask the taste of aging food, delicate glassware from Roman workshops, and the revolutionary technology of paper-making. Perhaps the most profound exchange was not material at all, but spiritual, as the teachings of Buddhism traveled eastward from India, leaving behind magnificent cave temples and altered cultures along the way. The Venetian merchant Marco Polo later wrote of the vibrant, cosmopolitan cities that thrived at the crossroads of these routes, places like Samarkand, where languages and goods from a dozen empires mingled in the bustling markets. But who made these long, perilous journeys possible across deserts and mountain passes? The true masters of this terrain were nomadic tribes like the Xiongnu and the Sogdians. These groups were not mere bystanders, they were essential intermediaries, possessing the deep geographical knowledge and hardy animals needed to navigate hostile landscapes. They facilitated trade, protected caravans for a fee, and created a chain of cultural transmission that stretched for thousands of miles. The physical evidence of this incredible reach continues to surface. Archaeologists have unearthed Roman coins in southern India, and Chinese silks have been found in ancient European tombs. These are not isolated curiosities, they are silent testimony to a world already deeply interconnected. This network also acted as a powerful conduit for technological innovation. The knowledge of gunpowder, first developed in China for ceremonial purposes, slowly traveled westward along these routes, eventually transforming warfare across continents. Similarly, printing techniques and advanced astronomical knowledge moved in both directions, changing societies in their wake. The ultimate legacy of the Silk Road is this incredible cross-fertilization, a testament to how the movement of goods is inseparable from the movement of ideas. While the Silk Road connected east and west, another legendary network pulsed to the south, flowing with the scent of divinity. The deserts of southern Arabia gave birth to the Incense route, a specialized corridor dedicated to two of the ancient world's most coveted substances, frankincense and myrrh. These were not mere perfumes, but sacred resins, harvested from scraggly trees that grew only in this specific harsh climate. To obtain them, merchants organized massive camel caravans that undertook a journey of immense hardship. They navigated the vast, waterless stretches of the empty quarter, a sea of dunes where sandstorms could erase trails and bury travelers, and where the threat of raids was a constant shadow. The value of their cargo was so immense that they braved these conditions for the promise of extraordinary profit. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder once calculated that the trade in these aromatics generated hundreds of millions of sesterces for the Arabian kingdoms each year, a fortune that stunned the classical world. This wealth did not simply vanish into the desert, it built spectacular cities from the rock. The Nabatean kingdom, whose capital was the magnificent city of Petra, rose to prominence by mastering this trade. They controlled the vital wells and way stations along the route, taxing the caravans and growing immensely powerful. The very existence of Petra, with its breathtaking temples carved directly into rose-colored cliffs, is a monument to the economic power of incense. But what was so special about these gummy tree saps? Their value was rooted in deep cultural and spiritual practices. From the temples of Egypt to the forums of Rome, frankincense and myrrh were essential for religious ceremonies, their smoke believed to carry prayers to the heavens. They were also fundamental to the medicine and burial practices of the era, used for their perceived purifying and preserving qualities. This demand created a constant pull, drawing the wealth of the Mediterranean world southward. The cultural impact was profound as the kingdoms of Arabia became sophisticated intermediaries, absorbing artistic influences, technologies, and ideas from the empires they supplied and in turn influencing them. The allure of these desert aromas truly did fuel both empires and the deepest of human spiritual yearnings. Far to the north, another river of commerce flowed through ancient forests, carrying the sun's own treasure. While the silk and incense routes connected the east and south, the amber road formed a glittering artery through the heart of prehistoric Europe. This was the route for amber, a golden, translucent resin that washed up on the shores of the Baltic Sea. Traded southward along a web of rivers and forest trails, this northern gold completed an astonishing journey, ending up in the workshops of Mycenae and even adorning Egyptian royalty like Tutankhamun. Its value was not merely aesthetic, amber was believed to be magical. Cultures across the ancient world saw it as captured sunlight, a substance with the power to protect its wearer from harm and even cure illnesses. This deep cultural belief created a powerful demand that pulled the material across the continent. Excavations of Mycenaean shaft graves from the second millennium before the Common Era have yielded intricate amber beads, proving that these long-distance connections were active long before the Classical Age. But who moved this precious cargo? The dense, trackless forests of Central Europe were the domain of Germanic and Celtic tribes. These groups were the vital intermediaries of the Amber Road. They knew the secret paths along river systems like the Vistula and the Elbe, and they controlled access to the sources. Through a series of hand-to-hand exchanges, often over many generations, a single piece of amber could travel from the Baltic coast to the shores of the Mediterranean. This was not a single organized highway but a chain of local networks, a relay race of commerce that connected the seemingly disconnected worlds of northern hunter-gatherers and southern urban civilizations. The movement of amber, in turn, facilitated other crucial exchanges. The north received bronze, salt, and finely crafted metal goods from the south, items that revolutionized local technologies and social hierarchies. Artistic styles also flowed along these routes. The intricate spiral and sun motifs common in Central European art began to appear on artifacts further north, showing a subtle but powerful cultural blending. This network highlights a profound truth that even regions considered peripheral were deeply integrated into a wider economic system. The desire for a beautiful, magical stone from the Baltic had, in its own quiet way, helped weave together the fabric of prehistoric Europe. The golden treasures of West Africa and the salt pans of the Sahara created an economic partnership that defied a continent. Across the world's largest hot desert, a network of trade routes emerged not in spite of the brutal environment, but because of the unique resources found on either side. In the south, empires like Ghana and Mali sat upon staggering wealth in gold. To the north, Mediterranean societies craved this precious metal to mint their coins and display their power. The Sahara itself held a different kind of treasure, one just as vital: salt. Mined from desert deposits and formed into heavy slabs, salt was not a luxury in the tropical south. It was a biological necessity for preserving food and replacing nutrients lost through sweat. This was the engine of the Trans-Saharan trade, a direct exchange of gold for salt, where each substance was worth its weight in the other. The Arab geographer al-Bakri, writing in the 11th century, described the court of Ghana with awe, noting that the king held an audience in a pavilion surrounded by 10 horses with gold-embroidered trappings, and that even the dogs guarding his residence wore collars of gold and silver. Such wealth flowed directly from the control of trade, but how did merchants cross an ocean of sand? They relied on the dromedary camel, the ship of the desert. These animals could carry heavy loads and travel for days without water, making the impossible journey feasible. Caravans of thousands of camels, guided by specialized Berber traders who could read the stars and recognize subtle shifts in the landscape, would undertake a voyage that could last for months. They faced scorching days, freezing nights, and the ever-present threat of sandstorms that could erase trails and bury entire camps. The silence of the desert was broken only by the creak of saddles and the soft footsteps of the camels, a slow-moving convoy connecting two worlds. This trade did more than move goods, it built empires and transformed cultures. The city of Timbuktu began as a seasonal camp for nomads and grew into a legendary center of learning and commerce. Its great Sankore University attracted scholars from across Africa and the Middle East, and its libraries became repositories of knowledge in law, medicine, and astronomy. The wealth generated by trade funded the construction of magnificent mosques whose distinct architectural style, using mud bricks and protruding wooden beams, became a hallmark of the region. This economic network also became a powerful conduit for the spread of Islam. Muslim merchants and scholars traveled with the caravans, establishing communities in trading cities and introducing their faith. Rulers of the Mali Empire, most famously Mansa Musa, embraced Islam and undertook the pilgrimage to Mecca, a journey that itself became a legendary event, distributing so much gold along the way that it reportedly depressed its value in Egyptian markets for years. The Trans-Saharan routes were not just lines on a map, they were the arteries through which wealth, faith, and knowledge pulsed, transforming regional chiefdoms into cosmopolitan empires whose influence reached far beyond the desert's edge. While desert caravans carried gold and salt across the Sahara, a far vaster trading network was thriving upon the open sea. The Indian Ocean was the true heart of global commerce for centuries, a watery crossroads where ships harnessed the rhythm of the winds themselves. Each year, the monsoon winds reversed direction with reliable certainty. From April to October, they blew steadily from the southwest, filling the sails of vessels headed toward India. Then, from November to March, they reversed, blowing from the northeast to carry those same ships back home. This predictable cycle meant that merchants could plan voyages covering thousands of miles, turning the ocean into a maritime highway that linked the entire region. The ships that mastered these routes were as diverse as their cargoes. From the Arab world came the How, with its distinctive triangular lateen sail that allowed it to tack skillfully against the wind. From China came the massive junks, floating fortresses with multiple decks and watertight compartments, capable of carrying hundreds of sailors and a fortune in goods. Navigators on these vessels relied on more than just the stars. They used tools like the astrolabe, a sophisticated brass instrument that could measure the angle of the sun above the horizon, helping them determine their latitude and stay on course across the featureless sea. The true magic of this system, however, was found in its ports. Imagine the harbor at Calicut on India's Malabar coast. Here, the air was thick with the scent of pepper, ginger, and cinnamon. The docks were a cacophony of languages, with Arabic, Tamil, Persian, and Chinese echoing through the markets. In the city of Malacca, further east, this diversity was its greatest strength. A Portuguese chronicler later noted that 84 different languages could be heard in its streets. It was a place where a merchant from Cairo could share a meal with a trader from Guangzhou, bargaining over bolts of fine Indian cotton and brilliant gems from Sri Lankan mines. The Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta spent years journeying through these ports, and he wrote with amazement about their wealth and tolerance. He described Muslim sultans ruling over Hindu majorities, with communities of Chinese merchants and Jewish advisors all living and working side by side. This constant interaction made the Indian Ocean a profound conduit for culture and faith. Muslim merchants from Arabia and Persia established trading communities from the Swahili coast of East Africa all the way to the islands of Indonesia. Over generations, these communities grew, and local rulers often saw value in converting to Islam, integrating their port cities into a wider network of spiritual and commercial exchange. Similarly, Hindu and Buddhist influences spread westward from India, leaving their mark on the art and kingdoms of Southeast Asia. The sheer value of the spices traded here would eventually lure European powers, desperate to cut out the intermediaries and seize control of the source. But for centuries before their arrival, this was a self-regulating world of shared knowledge and mutual interest, a testament to how the sea could connect civilizations more effectively than any empire on land. These intermediary cities were the vital hearts of the ancient world, pumping commerce and culture through the arteries of trade. In the middle of a Syrian desert or at the foot of Central Asia's mountains, places like Palmyra and Kashgar transformed from simple stops into magnificent, wealthy crossroads. Their power came from location, offering the only reliable water, security, and markets for hundreds of miles in any direction. A caravan emerging from the searing emptiness of the desert would see Palmyra's towers as a promise of survival, a place to rest, repair, and trade under the protection of its own formidable armies. These were not passive way stations, but active, sophisticated engines of exchange. Within their walls, the world came together. A merchant from Rome could haggle over Chinese silk with a Sogdian intermediary, using a blend of Greek and Aramaic to settle on a price. Inscriptions found in Palmyra itself list the names of trade guilds dedicated to specific routes, their members honoring gods from Rome, Persia, and Arabia on the same stone monuments. This was a true melting pot where diverse communities lived side by side, their distinct customs and languages slowly blending into something new. To facilitate the complex flow of goods, these hubs developed remarkably modern services. They offered secure warehouses to store merchandise, guarded caravanserais for the travelers, and even early forms of banking, where a merchant could deposit funds in one city and withdraw them in another using a clay token or a written letter of credit. The city's very architecture tells this story of fusion. In Palmyra, a grand colonnaded street built in the Roman style leads to a temple dedicated to the Semitic god Bel, but its ornate decorations show clear influences from Persian Parthian art. This was not a slavish copy of any one empire, but a confident, local creation born from its role as a bridge between worlds. The wealth that built these monuments flowed directly from taxes and tariffs levied on the goods that passed through its gates. Everything from spices and silks to glass and exotic animals contributed to the city's prosperity. So what could possibly cause such a vibrant heart to stop beating? The decline of these hubs was often tied to a shift in the trade routes themselves. Political instability could make a once safe path too dangerous. The rise of maritime trade, especially in the Indian Ocean, offered a cheaper, faster alternative to the arduous overland journey. If an empire that protected the route fell, or if a new sea lane was discovered, the caravans would simply stop coming. The lifeblood of commerce would be rerouted, and the great oasis city, once a brilliant center of the world, would gradually be reclaimed by the silence of the desert. Yet the legacy of these hubs is profound. They established the blueprint for the cosmopolitan city, a place where different peoples could coexist and collaborate for mutual economic benefit, an idea that would shape urban centers for centuries to come. While silk and gold captured the headlines of history, the true power of these routes often lay in the cargo that fed and clothed entire populations. The humble orange, for instance, began its journey in the forests of Southeast Asia. Through centuries of trade, its cultivation spread westward, carried by merchants and monks along the Silk Road, until it found a new home in the sunny groves of the Mediterranean. This was not a simple change of scenery. It represented a fundamental shift in agriculture and diet, introducing a new source of vitamin C and a burst of flavor to distant cultures. The same was true for cotton, a plant first domesticated in the Indus Valley. Its journey across trade networks gave the world a comfortable, breathable fabric that would eventually clothe millions from the banks of the Nile to the shores of the Americas. These were not luxury items for the elite. They were transformative goods that integrated themselves into the daily life of civilizations. The exchange of such crops was a form of quiet revolution, reshaping landscapes and supporting population growth in ways that grand monuments never could. Historians now recognize that this process, often called the Columbian Exchange, was merely the latest chapter in a story that began millennia earlier. Ancient trade routes were constantly shuffling the world's biological deck. Long before European ships crossed the Atlantic, the movement of sugar cane from New Guinea to India and eventually to the Middle East created entirely new agricultural industries and, tragically, new forms of labor demand. The mundane apple traveled from the mountains of Kazakhstan to become a staple in European orchards. Each of these transfers altered local ecosystems and farming practices, forcing innovation and adaptation. The trade in raw materials was equally vital for survival and progress. Consider the Bronze Age. This entire era, defined by a stronger, more versatile metal, was entirely dependent on long-distance trade. Copper might be mined in Cyprus, but the tin needed to alloy with it was incredibly rare, often sourced from as far away as Afghanistan or Cornwall in Britain. Merchant networks had to move these heavy, bulky materials across vast distances, connecting mines to workshops. Without this intricate and reliable supply chain, the technological leap to bronze, which revolutionized everything from farming tools to military weapons, would have been impossible. A society's resilience was often measured by its access to such networks. A city cut off from tin sources could not maintain its army's edge, while a region that adopted a new, hardy strain of wheat could better withstand a poor harvest. This constant, low-level exchange of everyday goods built a foundation of shared resources and knowledge that made societies more robust and interconnected. The true legacy of these ancient highways is not just found in the treasuries of kings, but in the very soil beneath our feet and the common foods on our tables. The most valuable cargo moving along these ancient highways was not something that could be weighed or taxed. It was knowledge. While merchants traded silks and spices, they were also unknowingly carrying the seeds of entire writing systems. The Phoenician alphabet, a revolutionary set of just over 20 simple characters, did not spread through conquest alone. It traveled on the lips and in the ledgers of traders across the Mediterranean. Its simplicity made it ideal for recording commercial transactions far more efficiently than the complex scripts of Egypt or Mesopotamia. As Phoenician merchants established ports from Cyprus to Carthage, local cultures adopted and adapted this versatile tool. The Greeks added vowels, creating a script that would later give rise to the Latin alphabet used by Rome and eventually by much of the world. This same Phoenician system also traveled east, evolving into the Aramaic script, which became the administrative language of the Persian Empire and later branched into the Hebrew and Arabic alphabets. A single innovation in communication, born from commercial necessity, had reshaped how half the world recorded its laws, literature, and history. This transmission of ideas extended deep into the sciences. The decimal number system we use today, including the revolutionary concept of zero, originated in India. Through the bustling ports and caravan cities of the Indian Ocean and Silk Road, these numerals were introduced to Arab scholars who recognized their profound utility for complex calculations in astronomy and trade. They refined the system, and from there it entered Europe, where it slowly replaced the cumbersome Roman numerals. This was not a simple swap of symbols, it was a fundamental shift in human cognition, enabling new frontiers in mathematics, engineering, and finance. The very tools that would later power the scientific revolution in Europe traveled along the same routes as bolts of cotton and bags of pepper. Perhaps no technology better illustrates this quiet revolution than paper. Invented in China using pulped rags and plant fibers, papermaking was a closely guarded secret for centuries. Its journey westward is a story of cultural collision and curiosity. After a battle in Central Asia in the 8th century, Chinese artisans captured by Arab forces brought their skill to the city of Samarkand. There, Muslim innovators improved the process, establishing mills that produced paper on an industrial scale. This new, relatively cheap and durable material quickly spread throughout the Islamic world, fueling an explosion of scholarship. Libraries grew, and the work of preserving Greek philosophy, advancing medicine, and recording geographical knowledge accelerated. When this technology finally reached Europe through Islamic Spain and Italy, it helped ignite the Renaissance and the Reformation, putting books and learning into more hands than ever before. The movement of paper did not just change what was written, it changed who could write and what they could achieve. Artistic traditions were equally mobile, blending and transforming as they traveled. The region of Gandhara in modern Pakistan and Afghanistan became a spectacular melting pot where classical Greek artistic styles, carried by Alexander the Great's legacy, met the emerging spiritual imagery of Buddhism. The result was a new form of Buddhist art that depicted the Buddha in human form for the first time, with features and draped robes reminiscent of Greek statues. This graceful, humanized iconography did not stay in Gandhara. It traveled east along the Silk Road with monks and merchants, profoundly influencing the art of China, Korea, and Japan. The serene stone faces of Buddhas across East Asia carry within them a distant echo of Mediterranean aesthetics, a testament to the deep cultural fusion that trade made possible. These routes were, in essence, vast, open-air classrooms. A merchant resting at a caravanserai might learn a new navigational technique from a sailor, while a local scribe could adopt a more efficient numeral for his accounts. This constant exposure to foreign ideas inevitably challenged established traditions and local identities. How does a society hold onto its own customs while adopting useful innovations from abroad? The answer was rarely simple rejection or blind acceptance, but a process of creative adaptation. Cultures proved remarkably resilient, absorbing what was useful and refashioning it into something uniquely their own. The world was being woven together not just by economics, but by a shared and ever-growing pool of human knowledge. The silent movement of goods and ideas required a shared voice to make it all possible. A merchant from Venice and a shipmaster from Gujarat could not rely on their native tongues to negotiate the price of pepper. Out of this practical necessity, a remarkable linguistic alchemy occurred. Along the busy ports of the Indian Ocean, a new, simplified form of communication began to emerge, blending Arabic, Persian, and local Bantu languages into what would become Swahili. This was not a language born in royal courts or universities, but on the docks and in the market stalls, forged by the daily need to understand one another. It was a lingua franca, a bridge language that allowed diverse cultures to conduct business, share news, and build communities. Far to the west, a similar process had unfolded centuries earlier. Aramaic, once a minor Semitic language, was adopted as the administrative tongue of the vast Persian Empire precisely because it was already widely understood by merchants across the Near East. Its simple alphabetic script was easier to learn than cuneiform, making it the perfect tool for keeping records, drafting treaties, and sending orders across thousands of miles. These trade languages became the invisible infrastructure of the ancient world, more vital than any single road or seaport. They allowed for a fascinating exchange that echoes in our speech today. The English word sugar, for instance, has a long and sweet journey. It derives from the Arabic sakar, which itself borrowed the term from the Persian shakar, which ultimately traces back to the Sanskrit shakara. This single word, carried along the trade routes from South Asia to Europe, is a fossilized piece of a global conversation. The same is true for citrus fruits like the orange, whose name in many European languages comes from the Sanskrit naranga, filtered through Persian and Arabic. These loanwords are living proof of the deep cultural connections that commerce created. Behind every trade agreement and shipment ledger was a human translator, a scribe who could navigate multiple linguistic worlds. In the caravan cities of Central Asia, Sogdian scribes were indispensable, fluent in Chinese, Persian, and Turkish, their skills ensuring that contracts were honored and communications were clear. Their work went beyond simple translation. They were cultural diplomats, carefully phrasing messages between empires to maintain peace and mutual profit. The very stability of these vast networks depended on this shared understanding. When different groups from the Swahili coast to the Arabian Peninsula all conducted their affairs in Swahili, they began to develop a shared regional identity, a sense of belonging to the same commercial and cultural sphere. This shared language smoothed the path for diplomacy, allowing ambassadors to speak directly to foreign rulers and forge alliances that were built on more than just military might. Language was the true glue, binding together the mosaic of human exchange and transforming strangers into partners. The same ships that carried spices and silks also carried something far more profound, a new understanding of the divine. Along the dusty tracks of the Silk Road, Buddhist monks traveled in the company of merchants, finding safe passage and patronage within the trade caravans. These monks were not just pilgrims, they were missionaries, and the oasis cities that dotted the routes became their footholds. In places like Dunhuang, at the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, they carved magnificent cave temples into the cliffs, creating libraries of sacred texts and galleries of stunning murals. These sites were more than places of worship. They were spiritual caravanserais, offering rest and reflection to weary travelers while exposing them to a new faith. A merchant resting there might hear the chants, see the serene images of the Buddha, and carry those impressions, and perhaps the belief itself, to the next city on his journey. This is how Buddhism slowly percolated from India into Central Asia, China, and beyond, its journey inextricably linked to the rhythm of commerce. A similar story unfolded for Christianity. Nestorian Christians, a branch of the faith that spread eastward from Persia, followed the trade routes all the way to the court of the Chinese Tang emperors. A stone stele erected in the 8th century in the Chinese capital of Xi'an tells their story, inscribed in both Chinese and Syriac, a testament to their successful establishment along these commercial highways. Their churches and monasteries in Central Asian cities served the dual purpose of ministering to traveling Christian merchants and engaging in peaceful dialogue with local communities. The maritime routes of the Indian Ocean facilitated another great spiritual migration. Muslim traders from Arabia and Persia did not simply bring goods to the ports of Southeast Asia, they brought their faith. Sufi mystics, often traveling with these merchants, were particularly effective in spreading Islam. Their emphasis on personal experience of the divine and their tolerance for local traditions resonated deeply. They did not demand a complete rejection of existing customs, but instead wove Islamic teachings into the local cultural fabric, making conversion a gradual and more accepted process. This spirit of exchange was perhaps most powerfully embodied by the Mongol Empire. At the height of their power, the Mongols controlled a vast stretch of the Silk Road, and their policy of religious tolerance was not merely an act of benevolence, it was a shrewd economic strategy. They understood that to keep the trade routes flourishing, they needed to welcome all merchants regardless of their creed. In their capital at Karakoram, one could find Christian churches, Islamic mosques, Buddhist temples, and shamanistic shrines all operating within sight of each other. A papal envoy to the Mongol court wrote with astonishment of this religious coexistence, noting that the great Khan protected all paths to the divine. This unprecedented openness created a safe corridor for belief systems to flow across continents, allowing ideas to mingle and compete in a marketplace of the soul. The goods changed hands in the market, but the beliefs exchanged in those same spaces ultimately reshaped the spiritual map of the world. But the same paths that carried silk and scripture also bore profound hardship. For all its wonders, this vast network of exchange had a shadow side, one where human suffering became a tragic commodity. Alongside bolts of cloth and sacks of spice, the Trans-Saharan and Indian Ocean routes saw the relentless movement of enslaved individuals. Historical records from the Cairo Geniza, a collection of Jewish merchant documents, detail the logistics of this heartbreaking trade, listing people alongside goods in inventories. These individuals, often captured in conflicts or raids far from their homes, were transported under brutal conditions, their lives and labor fueling the economies of distant empires. This was not an isolated practice but a systemic feature of the interconnected world, a stark reminder that the flow of wealth was sometimes built on profound loss. Competition for control of these lucrative pathways inevitably sparked conflict. Rival empires clashed not simply for territory, but for the economic lifeblood that trade represented. The struggle between Rome and Persia was at its core a centuries-long war over the arteries of commerce, a fight to dictate who paid tariffs and who reaped the profits. On the high seas, piracy flourished, turning busy maritime lanes into zones of risk where a merchant's fortune could be lost in a single, violent encounter. These pressures forced societies to innovate for protection. Caravans grew larger and hired more guards, while port cities invested in fortified walls and patrol ships, layering the cost of security into the price of every traded item. Perhaps the most silent and devastating traveler was disease. The same ships and caravans that moved goods also provided a perfect vector for pathogens. The Justinian plague, which swept across the Roman world in the 6th century, is believed to have followed these very trade routes. Carried by fleas on rats that stowed away in grain shipments, the illness moved from port to port and oasis to oasis, decimating populations and crippling economies. This was a vulnerability no wall or army could defend against. The free movement that enabled cultural flourishing also enabled biological catastrophe, demonstrating a fundamental fragility within the system. The fall of the Roman Empire offers a powerful case study in these interconnected risks. As political instability and conflict made overland routes increasingly dangerous, the steady flow of goods that had sustained the Roman economy for centuries began to falter. Taxes from trade dried up, armies could not be paid, and the price of essential commodities soared. This was not a single event but a cascade of failures, where the breakdown of trade networks accelerated a wider collapse. The very connectivity that had built the empire's grandeur ultimately amplified its decline when those connections were severed. How did societies grapple with these inherent dangers? They built systems of trust and mutual interest to mitigate the ever-present risks. Merchant guilds established codes of conduct and provided support for members who suffered losses. Complex legal frameworks evolved in trading hubs to resolve disputes between foreigners and locals. The lessons from this ancient struggle with globalization's double-edged sword are deeply relevant. It teaches us that while connection brings incredible opportunity, it also creates shared vulnerabilities, from economic shocks to health crises. The shadows that traveled the ancient routes remind us that progress and peril have always been close companions on the road of human exchange. The vastness of the open ocean was not a barrier but a path waiting to be read. Long before satellites, ancient mariners navigated by a living map written in the stars, the waves, and the flight of birds. The Polynesian voyagers of the Pacific achieved what seemed impossible, settling islands scattered across millions of square miles of water. They used no compasses or written charts. Instead, they possessed a profound generational knowledge passed down through song and story. They memorized the precise positions of key stars, noting how they rose and set over specific islands. They learned to read the subtle patterns of ocean swells, feeling the way they reflected off distant land masses through the hull of their canoes. They watched for the types of birds that flew at certain distances from shore and could even taste the freshwater layers in the ocean that hinted at a nearby island's presence. This was a science of deep observation, a way of navigating that turned the entire natural world into a guide. Half a world away, in the complex waters of the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean, a different kind of guide emerged. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a text from the 1st century, reads like a practical manual for merchants. It does not speak of mythical lands but of concrete realities. It lists ports in the correct order of a voyage, describes the goods available for trade in each, notes the prevailing winds and dangerous shoals, and even mentions the local rulers a merchant should appease. This was commercially sensitive intelligence, a written embodiment of hard-won experience that turned a perilous journey into a manageable business venture. This knowledge was later crystallized in the Portolan charts, intricate maps used by medieval Mediterranean sailors. Drawn on parchment, these charts were remarkably accurate for their time, showing coastlines with a stunning precision and crisscrossed by a web of rheum lines. These lines radiated from compass roses, allowing a navigator to plot a constant bearing across the sea. They were not just maps, they were functional tools for staying on course, and their creation relied entirely on the accumulated logs and stories of countless sailors who had made the journey before. The single greatest revolution in navigation, however, began in China during the Han Dynasty. This was the magnetic compass, a device that initially took the form of a ladle-shaped piece of lodestone that would pivot to point south. At first, it was used for land-based geomancy, a practice of aligning buildings and spaces with cosmic forces, but its potential for sea travel was quickly realized. By the time of the Song Dynasty, Chinese sailors were using magnetized needles floating in bowls of water to maintain their direction even when the stars were hidden by cloud. This technology did not stay in one place. It traveled westward along the very trade routes it would come to dominate, passing through the Arab world and reaching Europe by the 12th century. Its adoption transformed maritime commerce, making voyages more reliable, predictable, and safe, and giving sailors the confidence to venture further from the familiar sight of land. How did improved cartography empower empires? A ruler with an accurate map held a picture of his potential wealth. He could see the choke points where trade could be controlled, the ports that could be taxed, and the distant lands that held untapped resources. Early world maps, like the famous Tabula Rogeriana created for the Norman king of Sicily in the 12th century, were filled with geographic knowledge gleaned from Arab scholars and traders. While they still contained speculative lands and mythical creatures on their edges, their core was practical, depicting the trade routes connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia. This knowledge was power. It allowed empires like Portugal to plan their audacious voyages around Africa, aiming to seize control of the spice trade at its source. The ability to accurately map the world was the final piece of the puzzle, turning the daring journeys of individual merchants into the systematic, state-sponsored projects that would permanently reshape the globe. Even the most resilient systems are vulnerable to a changing world. The great trade routes did not vanish overnight, but faded like paths in a shifting desert, erased by a combination of environmental pressure and political collapse. The stability provided by empires was a fragile thing. When the Han Dynasty in China and the Roman Empire in the West both entered periods of prolonged crisis, the consequences rippled across the continents. The protective might that had guarded caravans from bandits and ensured fair dealing in the market simply dissolved. Routes that had been secure for centuries became perilous, stalked by raiders and fractured by warring local factions. Historians often point to this widespread political fragmentation as a primary cause for the decline. The great barbarian invasions that pressed upon Rome's frontiers were not just military conflicts. They were events that severed the arteries of commerce, making the long, uninterrupted journey an impossibility. The cost of security became too high, and the flow of goods slowed to a trickle. The environment itself seemed to turn against these networks. Research suggests that a period of climatic cooling and increased aridity began to desiccate key regions. Pastures along the route shrank, water sources that had sustained caravans for generations dried up, and the margins for survival in the harsh interior of Asia became ever thinner. This environmental stress placed immense pressure on the nomadic societies who were the lifeblood of the overland trade, often pushing them toward conflict with their settled neighbors. The final blow for many routes came with the Black Death in the 14th century. This devastating pandemic, which spread along these very trade corridors, caused a catastrophic loss of life. The demand for luxuries plummeted, and the pool of merchants, laborers, and camelteers needed to sustain the massive logistical effort was decimated. The Great Silk Road, which had thrived under the unified control of the Mongol Empire, began its final decline after that empire fractured into competing khanates. The political unity that had guaranteed safe passage was gone, replaced by internal tariffs and constant strife. Yet, even as the overland routes faded, the center of economic gravity was already shifting. The rise of reliable maritime routes, especially in the Indian Ocean, offered a safer, cheaper, and more efficient alternative to the arduous trek across mountains and deserts. A ship could carry the cargo of hundreds of camels, bypassing the political chaos of the interior entirely. Why risk the perils of the Taklamakan when a favorable monsoon could carry your goods directly to their destination? So what remnants of these ancient pathways persisted? They never completely disappeared. Local and regional trade continued along truncated versions of the old roads. The knowledge of the routes was preserved in the memories of communities and in the records of later travelers. More importantly, the legacy of these connections endured. The diaspora communities established along the routes, like Jewish merchants in Central Asia or Armenian traders in the Crimea, maintained their far-flung commercial networks for centuries. The cultural and technological exchanges they had facilitated were irreversible. The world had been introduced to itself, and that knowledge could not be unlearned. The old roads fell silent, but they had already woven a tapestry of connection that would inspire the next age of exploration. For centuries, these trade routes existed only in scattered texts and legends. Then the spades and brushes of archaeologists began to turn the legends into reality. The chance discovery of China's terracotta army in 1974 did more than reveal an emperor's buried legion. It exposed a network of influence. The chemical signatures in the clay and the styles of the armor hinted at cultural exchanges flowing along those very silk roads we thought were lost. Each artifact pulled from the earth is a message from the past, a single thread in a vast tapestry we are only now learning to read. The same is true beneath the waves. Off the coast of Turkey, the discovery of the Uluburun shipwreck, a vessel that sank over 3,000 years ago, was like finding a time capsule from the Bronze Age. Its hull held a stunning inventory of international trade: copper ingots from Cyprus, ebony and ivory from Africa, glass from Mesopotamia, and amber from the Baltic. This single ship, resting on the seabed, proved that a truly globalized economy existed long before we ever used the term. How do we trace the journey of a single pottery shard or a glass bead? The answer now lies in advanced science. Isotopic analysis allows researchers to take a tiny sample of an object and read its elemental fingerprint, matching it to the unique geology of its place of origin. A carnelian bead found in an Egyptian tomb can be chemically linked to a specific mine in India. A silver coin from a Viking hoard can be traced to a caliphate mint thousands of miles away. This technology has transformed our understanding, confirming that goods and people were moving across staggering distances with a frequency that rewrites our history books. On land, the lost outlines of entire cities are emerging from the dust. Using LiDAR, a technology that scans the ground with lasers from aircraft, archaeologists can now see through dense jungle canopy or layers of sand to map buried structures. They have identified the foundations of forgotten caravanserais in the deserts of Arabia and the eroded traces of feeder roads leading to major ports. Excavating these sites is like walking into a moment frozen in time. In the ruins of a caravanserai, you might find the hearth where a communal meal was cooked, the trough where camels drank, and the discarded pieces of a broken ceramic pot from a distant land, all telling a silent story of a night's rest on a long journey. Yet this work is a race against time. These irreplaceable sites face constant threats from looting, urban expansion, and the relentless forces of erosion. When a site is looted, the context is destroyed forever. We lose the story of how objects relate to one another, the very data that tells us who was trading with whom. Preserving these fragile links to our shared human story is one of the great challenges of our time. Each carefully sifted layer of soil, each meticulously mapped shipwreck, adds another piece to the puzzle. reconnecting us with the ambitious, interconnected world of our ancestors. The interconnected world we navigate today is not a modern invention, but an ancient reality operating on a different scale. The challenges and opportunities our ancestors faced along the Silk Road or the Indian Ocean routes are strikingly familiar to contemporary economists and policymakers. Supply chains, a term we associate with container ships and air freight, were the lifeblood of empires relying on a fragile sequence of camel caravans, monsoon winds, and trusted intermediaries. A delay in the tin shipment from Afghanistan could stall bronze production across the Mediterranean, just as a disruption in a modern microchip factory can halt car manufacturing on another continent. This ancient system pioneered the very concept of global interdependence, where the prosperity of one region was subtly linked to the stability of another thousands of miles away. Some economists now point to these networks as the first true case studies in globalization, demonstrating how the flow of capital and goods creates a shared and often vulnerable economic destiny. We can see clear historical echoes in ambitious modern projects. China's Belt and Road Initiative, with its networks of railways, pipelines, and ports stretching across Asia and beyond, consciously revives the spirit of the ancient Silk Road. It is a powerful reminder that the geography of commerce often follows deep historical grooves, repurposing old pathways for a new era. This long view of history offers crucial lessons for our own time, especially in managing the cultural diversity that trade inevitably brings. The oasis cities of Palmyra and Kashgar were early laboratories for multiculturalism, where a mosaic of communities learned to coexist under a shared economic interest. Their success, while imperfect, provides a blueprint for building cohesive societies today, suggesting that mutual economic benefit can be a stronger foundation for tolerance than abstract ideals alone. The administrative genius of ancient empires also speaks directly to modern policy debates. How did the Persian Empire manage tariffs across its vast territory? They established standardized systems and predictable tolls, understanding that excessive taxation would strangle the trade that fed their treasury. They grappled with fraud, with merchants attempting to pass off glass imitations as precious gems, leading to early forms of quality control and standardized weights. Their solutions to logistical nightmares, from maintaining the royal road to supplying remote caravanserais, were feats of pre-industrial engineering that still impress. Studying their successes and failures offers a treasure trove of insights. Their networks collapsed when political fragmentation made routes unsafe, when environmental change dried up vital water sources, or when pandemics like the Black Death severed the connections between people. Each of these historical vulnerabilities, from political instability to ecological pressure, has a direct parallel in our 21st century world. What ultimately can we learn from the resilience and failures of these early networks? Their stories are more than history, they are a mirror. They teach us that connectivity brings both immense opportunity and shared risk. They show that the most enduring systems were those built on a foundation of mutual benefit, cultural adaptability, and a deep understanding of the physical and human landscape. The silent ruins of a caravanserai are not just a relic, they are a question posed to our own globalized age. How will we build systems that are not only efficient, but also equitable and resilient enough to withstand the tests of time? The answers may well be written in the dust of those ancient roads. The true power behind these ancient caravans walked on four legs. Across the deserts and mountains, it was the biological genius of specific animals that turned impossible distances into manageable journeys. The two-humped Bactrian camel was the undisputed ship of the Silk Road. Its broad, padded feet were perfectly designed for crossing rocky terrain and shifting sands without sinking, while its dense winter coat could withstand the brutal cold of the Pamir Mountains. These creatures could carry loads of hundreds of pounds and travel for days without fresh water, surviving on the sparse, thorny vegetation found along the route. Their ability to endure such extremes made them living cargo vessels, the essential engines without which the overland exchange of goods would have remained a local affair. But how did an animal become so perfectly suited for such a task? The answer lies in remarkable biological adaptations. The dromedary camel of the Sahara, for instance, could lose up to a quarter of its body weight in water without suffering dehydration, a feat that would be fatal for most other mammals. Its nostrils could close completely to keep out blowing sand, and its red blood cells are uniquely oval-shaped, allowing blood to flow smoothly even when the animal is significantly dehydrated. These were not just beasts of burden, they were masterpieces of evolutionary engineering, specifically honed for the environments they traversed. The value of these animals went beyond their labor; they themselves became prized commodities. In South Asia, the elephant was the ultimate symbol of royal power and a formidable asset in both warfare and logistics. Trained from a young age, these intelligent giants could move massive quantities of timber or stone for construction projects, and their ability to navigate dense jungles and cross rivers made them indispensable for accessing remote resources. Meanwhile, the swift and elegant Arabian horse was a treasure traded across empires. From the steppes of Central Asia to the courts of medieval Europe, these horses were coveted for their speed, stamina, and intelligence, forming the backbone of elite cavalry units that could decide the outcome of battles. The breeding and training of such animals became a sophisticated science. Historical accounts describe how caravan masters would know each of their camels by name, understanding their individual temperaments and endurance levels. They relied on the animal's own instincts for survival, often allowing a lead camel, who remembered the location of hidden waterholes and could sense approaching sandstorms, to guide the entire caravan through the most perilous stretches of the desert. The very geography of trade was shaped by these creatures. Routes were planned around available grazing land and water sources that could sustain the herds. The domestication of the camel, for example, directly enabled the Trans-Saharan trade, creating a corridor across a barrier that had once been nearly impassable. Without these unsung heroes, the great networks of exchange would have remained a collection of local footpaths, never growing into the globalizing force that connected continents and built the foundations of our world. A merchant from Rome might not have understood the words of a trader from India, but they both recognized the glint of gold. Across these sprawling networks, a silent economic revolution was unfolding, creating systems to bridge the vast distances between empires and their countless forms of value. In some places, trade began with simple barter, the direct exchange of goods for goods. A sack of grain might be traded for a piece of pottery, or a length of cloth for a tool. But as distances grew and transactions became more complex, this system showed its limits. How could you barter for a shipment of spices that would not arrive for another 6 months? The solution was the creation of more abstract forms of money. In China, rolls of fine silk often served as a state-sanctioned currency, a tangible representation of wealth that was both valuable and portable. Along the West African coast and deep into the continent, cowrie shells became a universally accepted medium of exchange. Their beauty, durability, and difficulty to counterfeit made them a perfect currency for everything from small market purchases to large state tributes. But the most transformative innovation was standardized coinage. The Persian daric, a coin of consistent gold purity, and the Roman denarius, a trusted silver piece, became the credit cards of the ancient world. Their value was guaranteed by the immense power of the empires that minted them, and they were accepted in markets thousands of miles from their place of origin. A merchant in Alexandria would happily accept a daric because he knew that its value would be recognized by the next caravan heading east. This trust in a foreign government's promise was a profound leap in economic thinking. Yet carrying heavy chests of coins or bullion across bandit-plagued deserts was a tremendous risk. So merchant guilds, particularly those in the Islamic world and later in medieval Europe, developed an even more sophisticated tool, the bill of exchange. This was essentially an early form of paper check. A merchant could deposit money with a trusted associate in one city and receive a written letter of credit. He would then travel to his destination, often with no valuables on his person, and present the letter to a corresponding associate there to receive his funds in the local currency. This brilliant system minimized the physical movement of precious metal and drastically reduced the danger of travel. Economic historians often point to these innovations as the true bedrock of modern finance, establishing principles of credit, trust, and transnational banking that we still rely on today. The sheer diversity of currencies did pose challenges, of course. A trader had to be part merchant, part money changer, constantly aware of exchange rates and the relative purity of foreign coins. This necessity gave rise to a specialized class of money changers who set up tables in major marketplaces, their scales and touchstones essential to the smooth functioning of commerce. In the end, whether it was a stamped coin, a written promise, or a string of shells, money became the one language everyone understood, a fluid and invisible current that powered the visible flow of goods and ideas across the ancient world. Behind every great caravan and bustling port was a network of financial backing, and often that capital came from women whose names were nearly erased from the record. In the desert metropolis of Palmyra, inscriptions carved into stone tell a surprising story. They honor women like Bat Zabai, a formidable merchant who owned her own trading vessels and funded caravans that ventured to the Persian Gulf. Her wealth, earned through savvy enterprise, was proudly displayed in the grand public monuments she commissioned. This was not an isolated case. Legal documents from Babylonian times reveal women acting as independent financiers, issuing loans to merchants with the expectation of a full return with interest. Their signatures on clay tablets are a powerful testament to their role as economic players, not just passive bystanders. For some women, trade became a path to remarkable social independence. In the bustling trade centers of the Mediterranean, records show women managing their own workshops, producing textiles and perfumes for export, and controlling their own finances in ways that were uncommon in more agrarian societies. Their economic activity granted them a voice and a degree of autonomy that rippled through the social fabric. Perhaps the most striking example of female leadership in trade comes from ancient Egypt. Queen Hatshepsut did not merely oversee commerce from her throne, she launched it. She organized a monumental trading expedition to the fabled land of Punt, a venture immortalized on the walls of her mortuary temple. The reliefs depict the loading of ships with living myrrh trees, ebony, ivory, and gold, a testament to her direct command over long-distance exchange. This was state-sponsored trade on a colossal scale, led by a woman who understood that prosperity flowed along these routes. Of course, the path was not without its obstacles. In many male-dominated legal systems, women faced limitations on owning property or conducting business without a male guardian. Yet the historical record is filled with evidence of their ingenuity in navigating these barriers. Some operated through trusted male agents, while others, particularly widows who inherited their husbands' commercial networks, stepped directly into the role of business owner with formidable skill. Their contributions were not a minor footnote, but a vital, sustaining force. From the financier in Mesopotamia to the ship owner in Palmyra and the pharaoh on the Nile, women were architects of connectivity, proving that the flow of goods was shaped by their ambition and acumen as much as by any treaty or tariff. The same caravans that carried silk also spun tales of impossible wonders. Merchants returning from distant lands brought back more than goods, they brought stories, and with each telling, the line between fact and fiction blurred into legend. The Greek historian Herodotus wrote of India, a land he never saw, describing ants the size of foxes that dug for gold in the desert sands. While this seems pure fantasy to us, it was likely a distorted account of actual gold mining practices, filtered through multiple languages and the innate human desire to embellish a good story. These travelers' tales gave rise to some of our most enduring myths. The quest for the Golden Fleece, for instance, can be read as a metaphor for the very real and perilous journey to the Black Sea to acquire precious goods, where lambskins were indeed used to collect gold dust from rivers. The world map of the ancient trader was as much a chart of marvels as it was of geography. Dragon imagery offers a stunning example of this cultural transmission. The concept of the dragon, a powerful, serpentine creature, appears independently in both Chinese and European folklore. Yet, as trade intensified along the Silk Road, the artistic representations began to cross-pollinate. The European dragon, often a malevolent beast to be slain, slowly absorbed elements of the Chinese lung, a more benevolent and wise creature associated with water and imperial authority. This fusion of motifs, passed along through textiles, metalwork, and oral poetry, shows how trade routes became conduits for the imagination itself. Epic poems from around the world are filled with these echoes of commerce. The Old English epic Beowulf describes a hero traveling across the sea to a hall adorned with treasures, a sword from the giants, and a mail shirt fashioned by a legendary smith, each item a testament to the far-reaching networks that brought rare objects into the hands of kings. These were not just descriptions of wealth, but narrative embodiments of the wonder and danger inherent in long-distance exchange. The ultimate trade-born myth was that of Prester John, a legendary Christian king said to rule a paradise of immense wealth and piety somewhere in the depths of Asia. For centuries, this story persisted, fueled by vague reports from travelers and a deep-seated hope in Europe for a powerful ally against rivals. The myth became so potent that it directly motivated explorers and missionaries, including figures sent by the Pope, to venture into unknown territories in a quest to find this mythical kingdom. How did these stories shape the perception of the other? They created a world of tantalizing extremes. Distant peoples were either idealized as noble and rich, living in utopian societies, or monstrous and strange, inhabiting lands at the edge of the world. This mythology satisfied a deep cultural curiosity about the vast, unexplored world, but it also simplified complex foreign cultures into easily digestible archetypes. These legends were the psychological cargo of trade, born from the awe and fear of encountering the unfamiliar, and they proved that the most enduring exports were often the stories we told ourselves about what lay beyond the horizon. The relentless power of geography ultimately dictated where these great pathways of commerce could even exist. Rivers were the original highways, offering a smooth, reliable path through otherwise rugged terrain. The Nile, the Indus, and the Tigris and Euphrates were more than sources of water. They were pulsating arteries of trade. Heavy, bulky goods like timber and grain, impossible to transport in large quantities overland, could be floated on rafts and boats with relative ease. Major cities naturally grew at strategic points along these waterways, at river mouths where they met the sea, or at the junctions of different valleys. becoming natural hubs for the collection and distribution of goods from a vast interior. Mountains presented a formidable and opposite challenge. The soaring Himalayas acted as a near-impassable wall, forcing trade to flow around them through a handful of manageable passes. These narrow corridors, like the fabled Khyber Pass, became crucibles of cultural exchange precisely because everyone was funneled through the same space. Caravans from India, Central Asia, and Persia would all converge in these high-altitude valleys, their goods, languages, and customs mingling in the thin air. The location of these passes directly determined the rise of wealthy intermediary cities that serviced the travelers and taxed the trade. Deserts demanded a different kind of navigation. Here, the map was not drawn by rivers but by oases. Crossing the Sahara or the Go-By was not a matter of choosing the shortest line between 2 points, but of connecting a chain of life-giving water sources. These oases were not just rest stops, they were vital strategic assets. Control over a single oasis with a reliable spring could give a kingdom immense power, allowing it to hold the entire trade route for ransom. The routes themselves snaked across the dunes in a precarious dance, a testament to the hard-won knowledge of where the next pocket of survival lay. Even the climate itself could rewrite the maps over centuries. The medieval warm period, a time of unusually mild temperatures, may have opened northern passages. Norse sagas speak of voyages across the North Atlantic, reaching as far as North America, routes that would have been choked with ice in a colder era. At the same time, increased aridity in Central Asia could have desiccated wells and pastures, making some established desert crossings too dangerous and shifting the flow of commerce to more hospitable paths. So how did traders overcome these immense environmental challenges? They became masters of adaptation, aligning their entire logistical existence with the rhythms of the natural world. They scheduled their journeys around the predictable monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. They bred animals specifically suited to the terrain, from the sure-footed yaks of the high Himalayas to the water-conserving camels of the desert. They developed specialized knowledge, reading the stars for direction and recognizing subtle signs of distant water. In the end, nature was the silent partner in every transaction, the invisible force that carved the channels through which human ambition could flow. The silent dialogue between cultures is most eloquently spoken in stone and clay. A single statue from ancient Gandhara reveals a breathtaking fusion, where the serene posture of the Buddha meets the finely draped robes and classical features of a Greek god. This Greco-Buddhist art did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the direct result of cultural exchange along the trade routes, where traveling artisans and enlightened patrons blended their deepest aesthetic traditions. Art historians often describe trade not as a simple transaction of goods, but as the primary catalyst for artistic evolution, a constant stream of new ideas that challenged and enriched local styles. This creative conversation is permanently etched into the architecture of Samarkand's Registan Square. The towering, azure-tiled madrasas are a symphony of Persian engineering, Timurid ambition, and motifs borrowed from across Central Asia. The intricate geometric patterns, a hallmark of Islamic art, intertwine with floral designs and celestial symbols that resonated along the entire Silk Road. Every glazed tile is a testament to the movement of both materials and master craftsmen, who carried their skills from one royal court to another, creating a hybrid beauty that could belong to no single place but the Crossroads itself. The very objects of trade became canvases for this cross-cultural dialogue. Chinese porcelain, revered for its delicate strength, began to feature cobalt blue designs from Persian pottery. Arab merchants supplied the precious pigment, and Chinese artisans painted it onto vases destined for Middle Eastern palaces. creating objects that were physically Chinese but visually a blend of two worlds. This was more than aesthetic borrowing. It was a sophisticated economic response to the tastes of a globalized market. Similarly, ivory carvers in Swahili city-states produced exquisite ceremonial pieces that drew upon African, Arab, and Indian motifs. These carvings, some of which found their way to adorn the altars of European cathedrals, tell a story of interconnected tastes where a sacred object in one continent was fashioned by the artistic language of another. How did these artistic dialogues reflect the interconnectedness of empires? They made the abstract idea of connection tangible. A ruler who could not conquer a distant land could still possess its art, and in doing so, acknowledge a shared language of power and beauty. The flow of artistic influence was rarely one way. It was a complex negotiation, a visual record of encounter, admiration, and adaptation. Art became the most enduring cargo, carrying the signature of its origin while being forever transformed by the journey. The fading of ancient trade routes was rarely a single event, but a slow unraveling of memory and necessity. One prominent theory points to a fundamental shift in global economics, where the sea began to outpace the land. After the European age of discovery, when Portuguese and Spanish ships mastered the ocean winds, a direct maritime route from Europe to Asia became a reality. Why would a merchant finance a grueling, year-long overland caravan, paying tariffs at every oasis kingdom, when a single ship could carry 100 times the cargo directly to its destination? The old Silk Road's land paths, once vibrant with the sound of camel bells, became economically obsolete almost overnight, their complex geography bypassed by the efficiency of the sea. This transition was accelerated by the fragility of knowledge itself. Many of these routes were navigated using oral traditions, secrets passed from one generation of caravan guides to the next. When political instability or environmental hardship disrupted that chain, the intricate mental maps of water sources and mountain passes could vanish within a few lifetimes, leaving the paths to be swallowed by the desert. Environmental change also played a decisive role. Researchers analyzing sediment cores and ancient pollen records suggest that periods of intensified desertification, driven by natural climate cycles, made some corridors untenable. Wells dried up, pastures disappeared, and entire sections of route were simply buried under advancing sand dunes, erasing them from the physical landscape as effectively as from human memory. Scholars also argue that a long-standing focus on Eurocentric history deliberately overlooked the sophistication of many Asian and African networks. The grand narratives of exploration often began with European voyages, ignoring the fact that these sailors were simply connecting to pre-existing, thriving systems. This academic blind spot left many routes in a historical shadow until recent decades. We can see a parallel story in North America, where the extensive trade networks along the Mississippi River, which moved copper from the Great Lakes and shells from the Gulf Coast, were profoundly disrupted by the events of colonization, causing a rich history of indigenous commerce to be forgotten for centuries. Today, a remarkable effort is underway to bring these lost pathways back to light, not with shovels but with satellites and code. Archaeologists and historians are collaborating on digital reconstruction projects, using geographic information systems to model ancient climates and topography. By feeding data on known sites and possible resource locations into complex algorithms, they can predict the most probable routes that connected them, virtually rebuilding the ghost maps of our shared past. Understanding why these connections were lost makes their modern rediscovery all the more meaningful, revealing the delicate threads that once held the world together. These ancient highways were the lifelines of our first empires, a complex web of economic and cultural exchange that proved our world was interconnected long before we gave it a name. The relentless pursuit of resources like silk, gold, and spices drove the creation of these networks, but they ultimately carried something far more valuable. They carried ideas, technologies, and artistic styles that blended into new forms of human expression, from the Greco-Buddhist statues of Gandhara to the architectural fusion of Samarkand. This was not a simple transfer, but a creative dialogue that enriched every civilization it touched. The resilience required to maintain these routes over thousands of years is staggering, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of deserts, mountains, and political turmoil. The journey of a single piece of amber from the Baltic to the Mediterranean was a triumph of cooperation across countless cultures. Rediscovering these lost pathways is about more than understanding our past. It is about recognizing the deep roots of our own globalized era. The challenges they faced, from supply chain disruptions to cultural misunderstandings, are hauntingly familiar. As one modern historian notes, the ancient Silk Road teaches us that connection is our default state, not an invention of the modern age. The same forces that drew merchants to Samarkand now draw us together in a digital landscape. You can find echoes of these routes much closer to home. Visit a local museum and look for the foreign coin in a collection of local artifacts, or trace the origin of a spice in a traditional family recipe. These small discoveries are personal links to that vast, ancient network. Thank you for joining this journey through the lost trade routes that built our world. We would love to hear which of these pathways, from the Incense route to the Amber Road, captured your imagination most in the comments below. Let's carry forward the spirit of exploration and connection that once pulsed along these silent, storied paths.